This episode of the Party Loaded podcast is proudly sponsored by Audible.com. Check out their awesome catalogue of audiobooks with over 180,000 titles to choose from. And be sure to grab a free audiobook on us and support the show by visiting audibletrial.com/endgame.
Let's party.
Hello and welcome, one and all, to the Party Loaded podcast for Wednesday, I want to say the 27th of June. That sounds pretty good to me. So, hello and welcome back. We've had a short break, but we have returned to give you a weekly hit of everything great in the world of video games. I am one of your hosts, Luke Retallick, joined tonight by a couple of fellas. We've got, I'll just preface this by saying Jam is out tonight, but she has given us her notes, and we're going to chat through them. Tonight we've got Christian. How you doing, man?
Hello, I'm very good, thank you.
Yeah, have you rested your E3 muscles? You're all...
They're all recharged, that's for sure.
I don't know what an E3 muscle looks like. It's probably dirty.
You don't want to know.
No. And joining us for the first time tonight, we also have a long-time friend and former colleague of both of us, as it turns out, Mr. Adrian Chia. Hello, welcome to the show.
Hi, gents. How are we?
Yay.
We're good. This is rocking it old school because this is a team of lads that have worked together many fucking years ago.
Yeah,
it's a long time ago.
A bit of a flash from the past, I think.
Absolutely.
Yep. I've wanted to get Adrian on the podcast for ages, so I'm glad we've finally been able to.
Well, it doesn't hurt that he plays a shitload of video games and knows how to talk about them. So that's kind of we're going to do that. But like by way, I think we should probably do a proper intro, sort of separate to the main topic we're going to cover later. But one of the things that you have a fair bit of contact with IRL and experience with when it comes to sort of the gaming world as well as outside of that is working with people who have deafness to contend with when it comes to playing games as well. And people who are hard of hearing and all, and that entire realm that a lot of people don't tend to see a lot when it comes to our hobby. So,
that's right.
Do you want to give us a very, very quick intro as to what you do in that space professionally and why that's relevant?
Who are you, Adrian? Who are
you?
Sure.
Who am I, man? Yeah.
Who is Adrian? Oh, we're getting existential now.
Yeah.
I've never had to really contemplate my own existence. Okay. Well, I mean, I've been involved with video games my whole life, obviously, like most of us have been. Played all sorts of stuff all through my teens and into adulthood, and so in my sort of mid-20s I decided I wanted to try something new, and I went off and studied Auslan, which is Australian Sign Language, and I studied that for 2 years and became fluent in the language. I then went on to study a diploma of interpreting, which then qualifies you to work as an interpreter, and through that journey of learning the language, you are encouraged as a student to get involved in the deaf community. Mm-hmm. Some people aren't aware, but deaf people do have their own culture and community. And so by being involved in that community, I started to make deaf friends and go to deaf social events. And I did start to notice that there was what I would consider a lack of gamers in that deaf community. So obviously the deaf community has a range of ages as well. But I started to kind of seek out people that I thought might be interested in that kind of thing. Because I thought as a form of visual media, it might appeal more to people who are deaf or hard of hearing and don't have as regular access to other types of media such as radio or things like that. And so this kind of gave me an opportunity to think about more so about how people who are deaf and hard of hearing consume gaming media. So, and it made me almost like flicking on a switch. I suddenly became aware of all the kinds of things that video games don't provide access for. And I relate it specifically to deafness, but I'm sure there are plenty of other disabilities and barriers that people have that gaming doesn't accommodate. And I thought that would make a really interesting topic. So here we are.
So we're going to chat about that as the main topic later in the show. But you've actually the professional and personal has blended a little bit. Haven't you interpreted at Perth Games Fest before as well? Is that?
I have, yeah. Actually, that's a really good point. So for the past, I did it this year, and I did it 2 years ago, I think. So Perth Games Festival, fortunately, one of the organisers, her name is Vivian, she and I went to school together. We didn't know each other greatly in high school, but we're on good terms. And then later on, I noticed that she was part of the organising committee for the Perth Games Festival. And to her credit, off her own accord, she got in contact with the WA Deaf Society and requested Auslan interpreters for that event, which is really should be applauded because often people need prompting to sort of start that kind of process.
Yeah.
But and I honestly don't think it was because she knew me. I think she just decided that was a good thing to provide for the deaf community in Perth. And as it turns out, it was well received, and they did it again 2 years later, and that was really exciting because I got to finally mix my two worlds together. So I got to interpret a couple of panels and did a bit of roaming around the floor with a couple of deaf clients, and they got to interact with a few of the booths and the presenters. So yeah, that was a really great experience actually. The dream obviously would be to interpret something like PAX. Imagine being on stage and providing that access to deaf people out in the crowd. So yeah, that would be an amazing process. And
dream bigger, Adrian. Dream bigger. E3. E3.
E3.
Go all the way to the top.
Yeah,
Adrian, are you coming to PAX this year by any chance? I'm just curious.
Oh, I'm already making 2 trips over east this year, so it might be hard to justify. But
because I was going to say, if that is one of your dreams, we need to talk off air because I can chat to you about some stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, we'll stay in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, nice. Yeah, no, I did catch, obviously not yourself, but probably, I don't know if it's one of your colleagues or someone who you would be aware of, one of the Auslan interpreters doing some interpretation at the Perth Games Fest panels. I think it was either last year or the one before.
Sure.
I took my son along and we sort of sat down and, we're listening to a lot of people speak and actually seeing an interpreter in the room was something that I'd not encountered in a space like that before. And I thought it was really friggin' cool. So
Yeah, people are always really captivated by it. Obviously, being sign language is fascinating. Even before I sort of got into it, I always knew it was something really, really interesting to watch because in a way it's quite alien, the idea of sort of communicating without your voice. Once you get into it, of course, it feels perfectly natural and people actually pick it up quite easily. It's not as hard as people think.
Well, unless you do it like, I don't know if you guys have seen that. I'm sure you must have seen that clip of Eminem's interpreter that was floating around this week.
That's making the rounds,
Yeah, that makes it look really fucking hard.
Yeah, that's been making. I mean, that's an interesting example. That's been making the rounds on social media, the past couple of days. And of course, any interpreter that sees it kind of rolls their eyes, to be honest. But there's reasons for that. But we won't go into that. But it's it's interesting nonetheless. But your example of the experience you had at the Games Festival, Luke, seeing an interpreter, it's really great because it's the kind of thing that people never think about. But then as soon as you see it, you start to think every time you're out somewhere, like, oh, why isn't there an interpreter there? Or why don't we have an interpreter here? So it's great that kind of event is starting to be interpreted because the more it is interpreted, the more it will be interpreted as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The more visibility, the better. These are sort of aspects of the hobby that have been hidden for far too long. So, yeah, we will throw the covers off it later tonight and really dig in hard. That'll be a good time. But
sure.
Mentioning sort of games events and conventions and that kind of stuff. Before we sort of get stuck into what we've been playing lately, I did want to just quickly mention Christian. I saw a photo doing the rounds of you at Supernova Pop Culture Convention in Perth. Last weekend, you were standing next to some dude wearing a suit of Space Marine power armor. It looked like he was twice as big as you. What the shit?
It was awesome. It was the best Space Marine cosplay I've definitely seen in person. Because often with Space Marine cosplay, it's hard to get the proportions right, but that was it looked awesome. Yeah.
Most importantly, Christian, is what chapter was the Space Marine?
It was Ultramarine, of course.
Ultramarine, of course.
Yeah, which I'm sure a couple of our listeners will understand.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, other than Supernova isn't really known for its gaming. It's more of just a general pop culture and comic convention, but there's always a few gaming things on here and there. They had the free space with some PCs and PS4 set up. There were people playing like God of War and Detroit and a few just free play game areas. Nintendo did have some official representation. They had a tiny little area with some Switches set up. People were playing Donkey Kong and I was dreaming that maybe there'd be a Smash Bros there, but no, of course not.
It's funny you mentioned Nintendo actually, because I do know that Supernova in the past has actually been one of the event locations for the Pokemon video game championships at the state final level. So yeah, I wasn't sure if they were running that again this year or not, but
at least not on the Sunday that I went. They didn't. Yeah, they just seemed to have the switches set up, and I didn't actually. Usually they have like a person hanging around, like a staff member who like explains stuff to everybody and, you know, does the PR spiel. But I didn't actually see the Nintendo people working there, so it might have just been like a setup and you know, monitor remotely kind of thing, or I don't know. Didn't seem like a very big presence.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then the only other thing was there was a neat little stall selling like retro games. Like they had a bunch of Game Boy, Master System, even some like Dreamcast and Mega Drive games and all sorts of things. And it was nice just having a flick through that, and didn't actually pick anything up, but I always enjoy rifling through retro stuff. So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, bit of a blast from the past, seeing some old titles. Yeah.
For sure.
Speaking of which, my NES Classic will be in to pick up in the week or two. I got to remember to do that.
Yeah, it should be. I'm hoping Friday for mine. I got the Amazon Prime. Should be same day free delivery. So
nice,
because Amazon Prime is now available in Australia. It's only just been enabled in the last couple of weeks, I think. So it's really cool.
Nice.
Yeah, I remember reading news about that actually.
Yeah,
I've got to investigate the Twitch Prime end of that, because that's probably the bit that's more relevant to me at the moment. Whether we can get all of the in-game benefits and stuff from being Twitch Prime members. So
you definitely can. Yeah. Sorry, I just quickly. It's $5 a month for Amazon Prime, and it's $5 a month for a normal Twitch like sub to a channel. So if anybody listening subs to any Twitch streamer whatsoever, you might as well just get Amazon Prime, because it's the same cost and you get heaps of other benefits. So, like, there's monthly in-game rewards, and you get like free shipping on a bunch of stuff from Amazon.com.au, and even international shipping. If you spend over 60 US, then you can get free international shipping too. So
sweet.
Sound like a bit of an ad here? I swear I'm not sponsored.
Yep.
No, that's good. I'll go out and get it now.
Yeah.
No, I've been waiting on that for a while. That's good news for sure. All right, well, cool. Well, let's actually chat about some video games being the focus of the show. So I think it would only be right for us to throw it to our guest first. And Adrian, tell us what the hell you've been playing lately, man. What's going on?
Sure. All right. Well, I mean, I've been rather busy in my own personal life, so the style of game that I've been playing lately kind of reflects that. So I know that Christian was telling me that you guys played Into the Breach recently.
Yes.
So I've picked that up because like many people, I go through that sort of stage of ennui where you finish a series or you finish a game or you finish, you know, some project, and then you put it down and you feel like, oh, what do I do next? And you can spend days or, you know, sometimes even a week milling around, starting things and not finishing it before you settle into something.
Was that God of War recently? Or was it something?
I think it was God of War that triggered it, yeah. So I finished God of War, which is amazing, of course.
Yeah.
And subtitled, which is important for our topic later. Yeah. And I felt, I really wanted to play something but didn't know what. So tried to paint some models, tried to do some other things. And in the end, I went back to the one thing that Christian knows I love, and that's roguelites. I have a bit of...
He's a fiend.
I am a bit of a fiend. I have this... My personality can be quite obsessive at times, so I tend to... In most things in my life, I tend to latch onto something, really exhaust it until it no longer interests me in a very short amount of time.
I have observed this many times with various games.
Yeah, I suppose I don't need to explain to you two the behaviour. You've seen it firsthand. So
well, it's a good thing when it comes to actually being completionist about a few things, you know,
sure.
And exhausting it and moving on, as opposed to the millions of us that leave all of these unfinished stories just
hanging. That's the thing with roguelites, though, is that you can't finish them and move on. So Adrian just keeps playing them and playing them and playing them. So how many hours would you have on Binding of Isaac?
It's over 400 hours.
Over 400 hours.
Holy shit.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, so Binding of Isaac, I think, was my gateway roguelite. That was the the one that started it all. So, but yeah, Into the Breach is fantastic. And I mean, our background in wargaming obviously lends itself to that style of game as well. And I'm a massive XCOM fan as well.
Oh, yeah.
Having played both recent XCOMs to death. So Into the Breach, I found really fascinating sort of booting it up and seeing how small it is and getting the feel for the game and how sort of each each battle you fight is more, in the grand scheme, in the meta of the game, more like a single battle. And then overall, you're sort of piecing it all together as like a little campaign. And then, the roguelite elements that I love, like permadeath and sort of unlocking pilots and earning coins and unlocking more teams, that really appeals to me. So unfortunately it's actually a lot harder than I was expecting, so I've had to drop the difficulty down to easy just to see what the end of the game looks like, but I imagine it won't be long before I bump that back up and try to actually challenge myself. So
if it fools you though, like the fact that you get all of the enemy moves choreographed, you get lulled into this sense of I can just anticipate everything that's going to happen. It's not that simple.
No, it's not. Yeah, and I mean, one thing I really love about it as well is how you can be staring at the screen for minutes, thinking, how am I going to get out of this situation? If I don't, I can't move it there because that building's going to take damage, and then all of a sudden the penny will drop, and you'll find the perfect strategy to get away with whatever you're trying to do.
Murder.
Like not take damage for a turn. You're like, that's it, and then I find that's what's really satisfying about this particular game, when
it all clicks, it feels really good.
It does, yeah. It's really great when the penny drops and you feel it. The one really hilarious thing though is I got hours and hours and hours into the game before I realised one of the main mechanics in that you can rewind a turn.
Jan was the same. She totally ignored that bit too. That was so funny.
Investigate your UI, people. Investigate your UI.
I know, right? And it relates probably back to God of War, because I started playing through God of War. This is not a joke. I played through the entire game on hard. I did everything in the game except collecting all the ravens, and then in the very last boss fight of the game, I realised that you can upgrade your runes.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I played the whole game and I was like, why is this so hard? Oh, it's because I didn't upgrade my my runes at all until the last battle of the entire game. So,
wow, you're like Goku and Vegeta training in the hyperbolic time chamber with the gravity set at 100. When you just get swole.
Yeah,
it's funny because I've seen multiple people make a mistake in God of War, but it wasn't that one in particular. I've seen people where on the upgrade tree, how it has like additional bonuses. Like if you get 200 runic or whatever, then it'll give you an additional. I've seen people that have looked at that and gone, I can't get this upgrade until I've got 200 runic. And
I did that too. Not as far into the game. It was still a fair way in. It was probably a couple of hours into the game, because I remember I had tons of experience, and I was like, why do I have so much XP? Like, well, I'm not using it.
I've seen two different Let's Plays that have missed that to start with, but it says additional ability or additional power right there, but it's just so easy to miss that word additional. But
that's right, yeah. And then the other game I've been playing a lot of is Fortnite, which is not the style of game I usually go for.
Don't worry about it. It's a dead game. Nobody plays it anymore.
It's not very popular.
The server's isn't populated.
Yeah. But I have a couple of good friends that play it pretty regularly, so they're usually on when I jump on, and I find that the social aspect of it keeps me engaged. I do tend to really enjoy games when I've got a few more friends playing and I can have a bit of a chat while I'm sitting on the couch. So
you're playing on PS4, is that right?
I am, PS4.
So don't go and try and play it on Switch, because you'll get
Well, you won't be able to. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
Have you heard about that, Adrian? The cross-play lockout thing?
Yes, I have heard of that. Yeah. I mean, I have no reason to buy it on a second console anyway. So yeah. I mean, I guess apart from the portability, but it's not a game that I'm really interested in playing on the go anyway. I like to kind of sit down at the end of an evening and knock out a couple of achievements, and kind of like reading a book before bed, I guess.
Yeah, reading a book with guns. That's super cool. Yeah. Nice. All right. Well, Christian, you or me next? What do you want to do?
I'll go. I've just been playing. I started and completed one game over the last week, and that was Titanfall 2. So I went back a couple of years into my games library. I was digging around for things to play, stumbled across Titanfall 2. Because I'd heard when it first came out, some people that I follow on social media raving about one aspect of the single player in particular, and they kept talking about how there's a really cool mechanic in the single player that you don't expect, and that it makes it really fun. So I was really interested to find out what that was. And it turns out it's like there's a time travel dimension hop kind of mechanic at one point in the game, which is really cool, where you are like sort of fighting through this facility and you get an ability to swap between two different timelines. So like in one timeline, the facility is like destroyed and ruined and on fire. And in the other timeline, it's like pristine and populated by guards and everything. And you just, with a flick of a left trigger, you flip between the two different timelines, and you find yourself doing really cool like action where there's enemies in one timeline and then different enemies in the other timeline. So you're shooting in one direction, and then you flick timeline when you start getting shot at, move to a different position, flick back out, and then like the enemies have to try and keep track of you through the different timelines. It's complicated because it's time stuff, but it's good fun.
Yeah, I remember. Now that you mention, I'd forgotten what that gimmick was, and I remember now that there's really great platforming aspects of that game as well, where you'll be like wall running down a corridor, and like the left hand wall has been destroyed, so you can jump off the wall you're on, and then in midair flick between timelines and land on the wall in the past, and then keep running, and then you need to do it. So there's some really cool kind of almost like Super Meat Boy-esque platforming in there, which was really fun.
You know what it reminds me of heaps for anyone who's played this is Guacamelee.
Oh yeah,
because there's like the shadow dimension where you switch in, and it's just like that. Where like you're saying, there'll be platforms that are missing or platforms that are on fire or something, and you're having to like switch back and forth between them.
Interesting.
The platforming like segments of the campaign were like almost more fun than the shooting. Like the shooting's good. It's just like tight, snappy sci-fi shooting, but the platforming I think is more interesting. And unfortunately, that particular mechanic is only for like one mission, which is my main criticism of the game in general, is that it introduces that I think about the third or fourth mission in, maybe about a third of the way through the whole game, and then takes it away from you really quickly. And I feel like they should have sunk more time into making that a more developed like feature of the game.
Okay. Yeah, no, I agree with that.
Interesting. It seems like they're keen to maybe build that franchise out to maybe one more entry at least.
I'd like that.
So maybe they'll try it again if they got good enough feedback on that being a high point. They might incorporate it a bit more. Did they build out the story a bit more? Because I remember, like, I actually owned Titanfall 1, and I remember it being very story light because the big focus was multiplayer action.
Yeah. So like, they received. EA and Respawn received tons of like feedback from Titanfall 1 to like, please put it a single player campaign, please, and they did. So it is a solid campaign. It's only about 6 or 7 hours, but it's definitely worth playing if anyone's got it sitting in their library. There's one other interesting mechanic that they introduce, which is you get a gun that, how do I describe it? It's not like a gravity gun. It's like an EM gun, and it can shoot like switches remotely. And there are areas in the game where you have to like platform, and in midair you have to shoot a switch that will like move a platform into your way so that you can like jump between it. And so it's similar to the time jumping mechanic, where it's just you have to manage your APM and make sure you can actually accomplish the platforming. But they also take that away from you pretty quickly too. So
yeah. Disappointing. That's
disappointing.
Not fair.
But they do leave the game. Has a bit of an open-ending post-credits stinger to possibly lead into a third installment. So I definitely like that because I love mechs. So
I think it's interesting with the Titanfall series, because sometimes I think about it as if this game had come out, a couple of years earlier, I think it would have been a massive hit. And I think it's kind of like lost in the kind of myriad of AAA games that are sort of thrown at you through the year. And I think it's actually quite a fun concept and a fun game idea, being able to sort of run around in a first-person mech and eject out of it and rodeo them. I don't know, I feel like when I first read about Titanfall, I was like, oh, this is going to be amazing, it's going to last ages and people are going to love it. And then it kind of faded into obscurity, which I thought was quite disappointing.
That happened in the game's media too. So at the first E3 that Titanfall 1 was shown off at, it was lots of outlets like Game of the Show and like Most Anticipated Game, and tons of people thought it was going to be huge. And then I think Titanfall 1 was received okay, but then EA received lots of criticism for kind of shooting themselves in the foot with the release of Titanfall 2, because they released it not only alongside Call of Duty, but they released it alongside another one of their own games. I can't remember what it was. It might have been It might have been a Battlefield, or
Might have been Watch Dogs 2.
that was Ubisoft though. There was definitely another EA game that they launched Titanfall 2 like alongside, and people were like, "That's really, really silly." And so they created their own competition, which is a bad move.
Yeah, it seems like bad business.
Absolutely. No, I seem to remember that Titanfall 1 came out at the end of the 360 generation at the time, where it was a launch title for the new Xbox One as well, or it was very shortly afterwards released, I think. It wasn't too far off.
Yeah, it was released on both, yeah.
Yeah, but it fell into that awkward time where there was a big debate and controversy around the always online pitch that Microsoft were making for the Xbox consoles, because it was one of those games that, really was designed to be always online played, and people were railing against that a bit because obviously, not a lot's changed in that regard. Not everybody still has the same level of, internet stability. So not all console experiences are created equal when you've got that extra factor to deal with. So, yeah, I think that's probably one of the things that's making a lot of the big companies a bit gun-shy about this cloud gaming revolution that we're seeing sort of starting up at the moment.
So-called revolution, we'll see.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a slow burn, but we'll see.
What about you, Luke?
I played a bunch of shit. A lot of stuff. I'll keep it short. So immediately off E3, I was on a massive Division high, like having seen all the stuff for Division 2. So the first thing I did after getting through our mega recording is I jumped back into Division 1 to try and earn some of those shields, which are kind of the bonuses that are going to carry forward into Division 2. Didn't last long doing that, because what I realized is that playing that game solo at the level that you need to pick those things up is really fucking hard. So one of the things in particular that you need to do to get the first level of shield unlocks is there's things in the game called HVTs, which are basically high value targets. You have to farm intelligence from various different areas in the game to unlock an attempt at these high value targets, and then you go after them. It's like a boss fight for all intents and purposes. But soloing those things is really hard, because even though you could eventually wear them down and kill them if you play conservatively and are really cagey behind cover and that sort of thing, as soon as you reach the encounter, you're on a clock, so you can't actually take too long to do it, otherwise you fail it. And then you have to go all the way back and attempt it again. So, and the particular unlock that I was trying to get is you actually have to finish 8 of these high value targets within a week, because they kind of have like a cyclical reset. And I realized very quickly that without some assistance, there was no friggin' way in hell I was going to do that. So it would basically involve me grinding every single night, and there was too many other games I wanted to play, so I fell off that again pretty quick. And, as far as when I want to get that done by, Division 2 is not out until early next year, so I've got a bit of time up my sleeve. I'll try and, talk someone we know into jumping on and teaming up. I think even with 2 players, it's probably achievable, so... So that was that. But I did get my shoot on with another game that a group of us picked up, probably spearheaded mostly by Ollie, because he was keen to branch out our shooty shoots a bit, because we'd been doing a bit of player unknowns on the new Sanghok map, which is very cool, by the way. I actually quite like that thing. It's like it's a very Vietnam feeling map with the slightly smaller play area, a lot of mud huts and sort of junglish type terrain and that kind of thing. It was pretty cool. Still PUBG though, so I'm not going to talk too much about it, because it is more of the same, just on a different terrain. But yeah, we picked up Rainbow Six Siege. One of those games that I've kind of had my eye on for a little while, because of the continuing love that Ubisoft has been giving it, as well as Division and a bunch of their other titles. They're sort of picking up a good reputation as being a company that really sort of likes to support their games well after the release now, which is a great place to be in. But yeah, Rainbow Six, I think it's into its 3rd year now, because the 3rd year of Operators has opened up in the game. Operators, for anyone who hasn't played Rainbow Six, Operators are basically your characters. So you've got they're usually paired, because when you play Rainbow Six, you typically go through like defense and offense missions. So when you're playing against another team in live multiplayer, you'll typically switch it up and do like a best of 5. So
it's kind of like Counter-Strike, right?
See, I assume so. I haven't actually played Counter-Strike, so I can't draw that comparison. So I'm coming out from
the idea of like attackers, defenders, or like SWAT versus the terrorists in Counter-Strike. But that setup, I think,
that's totally it then. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And it's cool because they are very much like character-driven, entities in the way that they have different skills and abilities that complement whether they're attacking or defending. So that makes it quite interesting. So I mean, I'm not the biggest FPS guy. Like, I enjoy, a few shooters. I really enjoyed Overwatch because that's more of the, the funsy sort of, team-based stuff. It's not, this hardcore competitive level.
Some people take that super seriously, Rainbow Six.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Interesting.
We have encountered some interesting characters in chat, let me tell you. But no, like, I'm actually finding, I was tentative about whether I'd click with this game or not, but as it turns out, I actually really am. I like it a lot. And I think the reason why I like it is because it's not that... I've realised that I don't particularly connect with games like Battlefield, where there's this giant open arena and you can get just shot from a mile away and you have no chance to know where it was coming from or what you're doing, and it's very chaotic and you kind of just grinding in, getting killed, grinding in. That kind of stuff I don't find as fun. I don't like being part of a wave of troops. I like games that are a lot more sort of centered on the action up close and are more tactical, and Rainbow Six Siege is definitely that. So yeah, I've been enjoying it quite a bit. I don't have a whole bunch of the operators unlocked. I've only got a very small smattering, but for the ones I've got, they're pretty cool. And between us as a group, we've had some quite interesting team makeups. So Jam in particular has been favouring the medic character, which has saved my butt a couple of times, which has been very handy. So she's gone the heels. Ollie's been playing a character quite a bit that on the defense has like an armor ability. So he basically opens up a satchel full of bulletproof vests at the beginning of the round, and you just grab one and go, kind of similar to what Symmetra used to do in Overwatch before
with
they
the shields
changed it. Yeah, exactly. I've been playing with a couple of characters that have like different grenade abilities, and there's one with a breaching charge that you can use to sort of open up routes into the target from angles that normally wouldn't be protected, which is quite fun. But one of the things I really like about it is at the very beginning of each round, if you're on the attack, you actually have these tiny little drones which you can send in to scout out the area that you're about to assault. And these drones are kind of like these little cylindrical sort of remote controlled like racer things, I guess. They look like little sort of tube grenades almost. And they sort of drive around, and you can jump up sort of short bumps like upstairs and things with them and go through like air vents and ducts and stuff. But the whole idea is that if you can actually scout out the enemy's position, you can actually tag them before the game begins. And particularly if they're setting up in like a strong point to defend and they're unlikely to move because they don't want to break sort of cover or break hiding, you know exactly where they're going to be. So when you advance in and try and tag them, you can do it in a much more sort of systematic, team-based way where you're communicating and covering the exact angles you need rather than sort of running in all guns blazing.
And is that set up to cover a loading time, or is it just pre-game?
It's pre-game, yeah.
Okay.
It's not a loading time. It's kind of set up to cover the fact that the defending team needs time to set up their defense.
Right.
So, while they're running around and getting positions and they can actually set up planks to barricade doors and windows and reinforce the area. And there's these actual sort of armor packs that they unload and actually clank up walls, almost like putting a set of metal blinds down that actually provides a layer of armor to walls in the rooms that they're in. You've got a limited number of them. So you put those up and it's a lot harder for them to kind of be bashed through or shot through, because most stuff in the maps is destructible. Like, you can actually shoot through a wall with your gun, create a little hole, and then use that as a viewport to see what's going on in the next room and shoot through it if you can see with someone on the other side. So it's very cool in that way, because nothing is sacred. You can bash through and shoot through just about any surface unless it's been armored by the other team. So
is it my imagination, or did this game go free to play?
It's I don't think it's free to play. There is a very cheap starter pack. Like, the starter pack that I bought, I think, was $15 US. And that comes with just like a handful of operators, which, when you're learning the game, that's good enough, really. You don't need to go too crazy.
Sounds like the same thing that Ubisoft did with For Honor as well, where it hasn't gone free to play, but it's just they've got like a cheap starter version.
I think so. I think that's probably a good comparison, actually. And there is sort of single, actually, I shouldn't say single player. There's PvE content as well. So if you don't want to play multiplayer against other teams, you can actually do like terrorist missions against AI terrorists. And they're very different too, because they've got different kind of objectives, and it's a little bit more horde-based. Instead of taking on a team that's the same size, you might actually be trying to defend like a bomb defusal where there's waves of dudes coming in at you with different weapons and things as well. But yeah, the game's solid. Like, I definitely recommend it. I think it's got a lot of replayability. It's a lot of fun. The only downside, I guess, is because it is very competitive. You've got that culture that comes with it that you see in a lot of those sorts of games. But if you can rise above that and ignore it, then it's not a big issue. So, but learning the maps and learning your roles certainly helps to counteract a bit of that, because you don't tend to draw a lot of that vitriol when you actually are not acting like an idiot. So it's just one of those things. It's a learning curve. Yeah.
That's just like real life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it's a new experience for me. So I've been enjoying that quite a bit. But look, the main game I wanted to talk about tonight, though, is one I actually just finished about 10 minutes before starting the show tonight. I was racing through, I say racing, I wasn't really racing. I was taking enough time to enjoy it through a game that we actually did see shown for the first time at PAX, at E3, which was the Awesome Adventures of Captain Spirit by Don't Nod. So it is the makers of the Life is Strange series, which we've talked a number of times about on the show before. So far they've had Life is Strange Before the Storm, which is the prequel to the main Life is Strange, and Life is Strange 2 coming out later this year, which we'll talk about in the news. But this one is kind of like a standalone single episode adventure that is connected to the Life is Strange universe, but doesn't sort of use the same characters. I was a little curious as to how this was going to go in terms of being connected, as opposed to just being a completely separate thing. But now I understand why that is the case, and it's not as closely connected as you might think at the moment, but that it leaves the door open for stuff to happen when they do this.
Is it set in the same town?
No, it is. Okay. To be clear, without being too spoilery, there are characters in this adventure that are from that town. So. Okay. But the adventure is not in that town, if that makes sense. Yep. So there's definitely history, and you do see names of characters that you recognise from the original Life is Strange, particularly from Blackwell Academy, which is the school that a lot of that sort of revolves around. And Arcadia Bay is mentioned a number of times. But yeah, it's not where the stuff is set, so you can't draw an immediate sort of comparison there. But yeah, the main character, Chris, who's a young kid who basically he is at home with his dad, and he's just engaging on a weekend in a whole bunch of horseplay and imagination activities and pretending that he is the titular character, the awesome Captain Spirit. So he basically, at the very first thing you do is you get to draw a picture of yourself as the superhero. You get to select, how your costume is going to look. So you can select, mask or helmet, armor or, light sort of padding and colors and that kind of thing. Like if you want to make him look like Batman, you pretty much can make him look like Batman. I chose to be a bit more colourful because that just sounds boring to me. But yeah, like you do all that sort of stuff. And then during the adventure, you actually, you seek out imaginary villains and challenges and you actually get to build your super costume by scavenging for different bits and pieces around the house. And it's really cool. Like, with a lot of the Life is Strange games, it's kind of like a sandbox environment where you walk around, you interact with different objects, and they tell part of the story. So the narrative unfolds as you kind of interact with the world around you. Now, this one has a different spin on it, where there's certain objects around the house where if you see like a flashing yellow thing hovering over the interact options with it, you can hold the E button and then interact with it, and it basically turns it into like an imagination mode where you do like a superhero interaction with it. Like, to give you an example, it's like, when you're a kid and you hop on an elevator, and as the doors are closing, you reach your hand out and you pretend that you're closing the doors.
What do you mean as a kid?
Oh, yeah, exactly. You know what I'm talking about. It's exactly that kind of shit. So there's very clever sort of use of camera angles and that sort of stuff to really make it seem like he is doing stuff by telekinesis. It's not really the case, like it's all imaginary, but the way they do it is very cool to sort of capture the theme of it. I like it a lot. But the interesting thing is that and this is going off the theme that we discussed a couple of weeks ago when we talked about this, he's not in the best sort of home environment. Like his dad is in a bit of a spot, he's a bit of a drinker, he's sort of, neglecting his son. But compared to this kind of trope, when I saw it recently in Detroit Become Human, where there's like a parental figure that is clearly sort of, the bringer of abuse and,
the dirtbag.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost like that real sort of trope that, is exactly as extreme as you would imagine that to be. This is not. Like the dad is actually a good guy. He's just lost his way. So you can kind of sympathize with him a bit, but he is kind of like a really negative, influence in other ways too. So it's not as black and white as it was in like the Detroit situation. This one's a lot more shades of grey, and I think that actually adds to the game quite a bit because you spend a while kind of learning about what's going on in the house and whether or not you should sort of, sympathize with him or not. So yeah.
Sounds a bit like Chloe's stepdad in Life is Strange 1.
Exactly like that, actually. Yeah, there's definitely both sides of the coin there as you learn more about the character. So, and that's something I really like about Don't Nod. They don't take the easy way out when it comes to building characters like that.
That's really cool.
Yeah, so, would recommend. It's only about 2 hours of play. I think if I was going to compare it to any of the Life is Strange adventures, I'd probably compare it most closely to the final episode of the Before the Storm. So when they did the reunion sort of catch up with Max and Chloe, sort of set back in time when they were kids. It's very similar to that. You don't tend to go out and interact with a lot of other characters. It's very much just about those two, like the father and son. It's very much that one sort of environment that you're in. You don't sort of explore too far out of that. And you don't expect it to be like action-packed, lots of events and sort of, time sort of moving forward kind of narrative. It's very much just, what can we learn about these characters here and now sort of thing. So, yeah, but it's cool. It's good fun. And Don't Nod make good games. So... but yeah, that's pretty much it. I won't go into any of the other stuff. I'll save it for next week because I've got plenty to talk about as far as another game I've nearly finished, which is Yakuza 6. But I'll get into that in detail next episode. So yeah. Let's kick into some news, and I think it's probably a good segue because I've just been talking about the awesome adventures of Captain Spirit to talk about Life is Strange 2 because the date for that got announced this week. So we had a bit of an info drop and a very, very short teaser trailer that didn't really give much away at all. But Don't Nod have confirmed that September 27 is when we're going to see the release of Life is Strange 2. So it's going to be out on PlayStation 4, PC and Xbox One. And there's really not a lot that they're giving away, except that there will be elements from the Captain Spirit stuff that will sort of play into it. Don't know what. And it will have a 5-episode arc. So that's the same size as the original Life is Strange, which is good. So they're not making it super short like the prequel was. It's going to be another full-length one. But aside from that, who fucking knows?
Can I just ask a question? Having not played the first Life is Strange and not really knowing anything about it, I have played a couple of Telltale games. Is it a similar kind of experience?
Yes, I would.
Yeah.
I would say it's much better for various reasons. It's better,
yeah, but as far as like mechanically and like the structure goes, it's episodic, adventure, like interacting story game. So
yeah, do you guys feel that this might be the modern day point and click? Is that sort of what?
Yeah, I think it is for sure.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's a good example.
They've stripped away a lot of the obtuseness of the old point and click genre of like, you've picked up this pipe, now try this pipe on 20 different objects to see what it does. And they just got it down to the bare bones.
Yeah, combine this pipe with 50 other objects. Yeah. Now apply that combination in 200 different places until you get it right.
Yeah. The thing that made the original Life is Strange a bit different was because it did have that fantastical, supernatural sort of time winding element to it. Because the main character actually has the ability to rewind time, and that factors into quite a bit of the puzzles sort of stuff that you have to do. And from a narrative standpoint, that opens up some really interesting possibilities with allowing you to sort of get into encounters again and play things out differently, even within the same playthrough, if that makes sense. So
that sounds a bit strange.
Yeah. Well, that's just life, mate.
I couldn't help myself.
So I mean, who knows? Who knows that's going to go? I'm really looking forward to it, though. They are very, very good at building characters and making compelling stories that are not sort of what you would expect in terms of how they play out. So,
and how much playtime could I expect out of the first Life is Strange?
I think every episode is usually about 2 hours or 2.5 hours. So
okay, cool.
Yeah. So I'd say 8 to 10 overall around.
Yeah,
right. I might have to check it out.
They typically release the first episode at a pretty low price or free, and then you pay for each of the others as they come out. But the original Life is Strange was released over a long period of time. Like I think it was about 9 months before all the episodes were available originally. They did speed things up considerably after that because I think the studio sort of developed a bit, and they had a bit more resource to sort of throw behind development. But and hopefully it's not another 9 months because that would suck a bit. But we will see. There you go. Yeah. So we spoke a little bit before when, Adrian, you were mentioning Fortnite about some of the cross-play considerations that have been a fairly large talking point in the news over the last few weeks. So this is probably the big story that came out of E3 after E3, actually, with the release of Fortnite on Nintendo Switch. And immediately following that, we had the Minecraft Better Together update for Switch as well. Microsoft and Nintendo have been having a jolly old time with this in the wake of the controversy surrounding PlayStation. So have you guys seen any of this stuff? Like, have you seen any of the Twitter sort of posts from the Microsoft and Nintendo accounts or anything like that?
I've caught a little bit of it, and I've seen the trailer they put out, but haven't followed it too closely.
Yeah, I haven't followed it at all, Luke. Do you want to break it down for me so I can understand sort of what's going on here?
Okay, so there's kind of two sides to it. One is that Sony's been copping an immense amount of flack for the account lockdown issues that people have been having in terms of their Epic accounts when playing Fortnite. So basically anybody who wants to play Fortnite on a console other than PlayStation or PC for that matter, that has actually used their Epic Games account on a PS4 at any time in the past, their account is locked to that platform and they can't use it on Switch, they can't use it on PC, they can't use it on Xbox, etc. So you can't even decouple your account from the PlayStation. Like, it just won't let you. If you've played on PlayStation even once before, it's tainted forever and you would need a separate Epic account to play on those other consoles.
And it's especially annoying because it is a free-to-play game too, so it's not the sort of situation where it's only affecting people that are going to buy it on multiple consoles. You should just be able to play it on anything, and it's free, so there's no barrier to entry to just installing it on your Switch or installing it on your PC and wanting to play between them. So
yeah, it's the investment in time, and if people are picking up season passes and all the cosmetics they've earned and that kind of stuff. So yeah, people are understandably upset, like, because it's a game that people are playing mobile a whole bunch. Switch is a great platform for a lot of people to play it. It's really sort of opened up the market. They sold I think there was 2 million installs in the first 48 hours or something on Switch. It was an insane number anyway.
Oh wow!
So yeah, but the thing that's been coming around is just the backlash has been unprecedented. Like, Sony's the PlayStation official Twitter account, when it posts about anything, every fourth tweet back on it at the moment is someone giving them shit for the Fortnite situation. So
yeah, right.
Yeah,
and why did this occur? Like, why are they doing it? What's the motivation behind it?
Yeah, money, I think, would have to be the answer ultimately. We theorized about this a little bit. Sony, in terms of the console cycle, are in the lead at the moment. They're beating Xbox 2-1 in terms of platform sales, and they're obviously concerned about sharing their audience with the competition. But I think there's a point at which the damage to their brand, it starts to equal dollars as well. It's just a matter of where is that line. So
I think personally, they haven't talked about this, but I suspect there's an aspect of security to it as well, because the Sony network has been hacked a couple of times, and I think they're quite paranoid about blending their network, like opening it up to any outside sources as well. I think that's a possibility too, is that it's like a cybersecurity issue too.
Yeah, that could be true. Certainly with the most popular game in the world currently comes a lot of attention and people trying to get into people's accounts. So yeah, that could be right. But yeah, it's interesting. Like I like to think of each gaming year in terms of some of the biggest news cycles, and you can kind of pick out a very small number of what the biggest themes of the year are. Like last year, we would have said it was Battle Royale being one of the big themes, and
loot boxes.
Loot boxes is another good example. This year so far, I think Fortnite has probably been one of them, because that's sort of transcended a lot of the mainstream sort of games focus this year. But if I was to pick a second one, I think it's probably crossplay. I think crossplay has been a really big thing this year, and Sony are really copying it on this one, because it's really in the focus right now. And it's kind of come at a perfect time for Xbox and Nintendo, because they've got these new things that are just coming out where they can spend all of their time having fun on social media and advertising the positive aspects of this without even directing anything specifically at Sony, and everybody knows what the fuck they're talking about. So,
yeah, it's perfect really, because like this trailer they just put out with the Minecraft beta together, like they haven't just whipped this up in the last week. Like, this has been something that they would have been recording and planning before this shitstorm blew up, but it's just perfect for them. It's just got so much more added value and like extra sort of side meaning loaded onto it now because of what's happened.
Yeah. I mean, this is the kind of thing that when we come to the next launch of sort of main consoles, this kind of thing could really play a big part in, who wins that first opening salvo of the new generation battle. So
yeah, it's like game sharing was, because that was a big thing that Sony was like smug about in the new console generation was, not having this always on thing and being able to share games between different people. They put out like a funny little passive-aggressive clip of one person handing the game case to another person. Yeah.
What was that one? Was it Adam Boyes and Shu? That one was?
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah. It's like, this is how you share games on a PlayStation. Here you go.
I've actually seen that meme reskinned recently with Xbox and Nintendo. This is how you crossplay.
So it's like the tables have turned completely. At the start of this generation, they were the gaming like heroes. They were like the people that were out for the everyday gamer. But now, tables have turned.
Yep.
And we'll see if it bleeds into the next gen.
Yeah, there's a lot of sort of media outlets at the moment wondering how long it will be before Sony kind of backs down on this one. But I actually don't think they will. Like, I think, they've dug themselves in now, and I don't think there's any coming back from it. Like, if they turn around and then all of a sudden sort of enable crossplay and allow it, I don't think that's actually going to give them the positive press that they would need, because the damage has kind of been done already. So
yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it'll be interesting.
Yeah, jumping into some more news quickly, just blasting through. Nintendo have announced a Labo Creators Contest, which I think is pretty cool. So Labo came out a couple of months back, and I don't think it got too many people talking, but it's like popular enough that they have done a contest where you can win a cardboard themed Nintendo Switch, an exclusive looking Switch, and it looks really cool. It's just like a matte brown design, and some other swag like Joy-Cons and jackets and signed certificates. And there's two categories for the competition. One is designing a Toy-Con musical instrument, and another is using the best gaming experience using the Toy-Con Garage, which I don't actually know.
That's the Creators Toolkit.
That's the Creators Toolkit? Okay, yeah. So I just think it's really cool and worth mentioning that Nintendo are continuing to support Labo, and they are getting like a community element here. And I think that Switch is going to end up being sold on eBay for tons of money.
Oh, yeah.
It's very cool.
Definitely. So, it's very relatable side note. My son Ben turned 9 last week, and guess what I got him for his birthday? The Labo variety pack.
Labo, nice.
So we haven't actually popped it open and built it yet. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but we might do that over the coming weekend, and I might be able to talk about it next episode. So there you go.
Yeah. Cool. And then more Nintendo stuff is, I think we've all been dipping back into Pokemon GO a little bit because of the updates.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
definitely. I've recently opened the app for the first time in probably months on my phone, and been really enjoying the new friend features with yourself, Christian. You're sending each other gifts. Yeah. I mean, at the moment, you're the only person on my friends list, but that's not too different from real life.
Why haven't we shared our details? That's an oversight.
Well, we will now. Yeah. We certainly will.
Good, nice. I very quickly filled up. I don't know if there's a cap, but I've got 42 on my list at the moment, and it took a few logins for that to actually catch up. So, yeah. I don't know if you two noticed, but in the opening couple of days of the whole Friends thing being unlocked, I think that they might have reduced the amount of freebies you get when you send each other gifts, because you can basically, your friends in your list, you can send a gift, which you can sort of get these gifts from visiting Pokestops and spinning them up, and then you send them to someone on your friends list, and you can kind of increase your friendship level with them. But initially, I was getting like packs with like up to 10 Pokeballs and 10 sort of heal sprays and that kind of thing, and my inventory was filling up in like a blink of an eye. Now I've noticed in the last couple of days that they've reduced that right down to you only getting like 1 or 2 of each item as opposed to like 10 at a time, because I think they were realizing that people were just letting the gifts queue up because they couldn't open them all because of their inventories always filling up. So have you noticed that at all?
Yeah,
is that a thing?
I have noticed that too.
Yeah, me too. Yeah,
I was wondering for a second why I had stopped getting eggs, and then I realized it's just I already had 9 eggs because there's exclusive 7-kilometer eggs. I think they're exclusive to trading, and they have a higher chance of Alolan forms. And they can, if you get the egg from someone in a different region, it's got a high chance of having that region's Pokemon in it.
Oh, sweet!
There you go.
That's very handy.
That's cool.
So I got an Alolan Sandshrew already, which is cute.
Oh, awesome! My goal is to get a Heracross. Christian knows Heracross is my favourite Pokemon, but I know he's a South American exclusive, so I think the chances of that are pretty slim unless they introduce some other mechanic, another way to get it.
Go on the Brazilian Pokemon Go subreddit and just
get someone
Get a
to trade.
friend. Yeah.
Actually, that's actually a very practical solution. I didn't even think of that.
Well, you're down with the whole Pokemon community stuff now. You've been catching up with groups on Discord and going to organised raids. You should be able to do this.
Yeah, I think I may be one of the few people that actually sort of, in my circle of friends, actually went that far. So yeah, I had a good time doing that. I ended up. It's actually a really funny story how it happened, because I remember I was near a train station in the city, and I had the app open and was playing the game, and I noticed that there were quite a few people gathered around where a raid was about to begin. So I went over there and went in the raid and got a Tyranitar, which was fantastic. Actually caught it. And then a few other people around. This is probably really one of the sort of great stories that come out of Pokemon Go, was chatting to some people, and they said, oh, you should jump on the Discord, and they gave me their details. And then through sifting through all the different areas in Perth that are listed on the Discord chat, ended up finding a local group near my house in my suburb of Baldivis. And sure enough, that group was meeting up, almost several times a week and going out together and doing these raids. And I managed to catch a few legendaries with them, and it was a really fun experience. Like, I imagine, it's the kind of experience that could have led to, actual proper friendships with people, bridging strangers, becoming friends, and all that kind of thing.
People have gotten married through it.
Yep.
Yeah, probably. I mean,
amazing how people behave when they're not behind that veil of anonymity anymore.
I know. Yeah, when there's a shared interest and a shared goal, I guess more importantly, that's sort of when you're all sort of battling that gym and you're so close to almost beating it, and then the cheer goes up when everyone beats it. There's something really special about that, I think, that is part of the whole phenomenon. So yeah, I'm really excited to get back into it, actually, because, I mean, part of the commitment of going out and raiding, it did become a bit tedious after a while. So now being able to catch some legendaries without doing that is very exciting.
Well, I did recently read in the news a story about a father and son in America who have been adult son and father who they beat up somebody who had just stolen their gym, gym sniped them, and and so they've been taken to jail for that. So
yeah, well, rightly so. Yeah, they'll catch plenty of Pokemon in jail.
yeah.
Harsh. All right. Well, what's going on with Binding of Isaac?
Oh, yes. I just wanted to. This is something that Adrian pointed out to me just before the show started. So, what's the Binding of Isaac? The creator's name? Ed McMillan?
McMillan, yeah. So the guy, it's cool. It's called. At first, when I saw this on a news site, it was cleverly veiled by whoever put the news article together, because all the article said is Binding of Isaac 4 Souls announced. And I was like, oh, fantastic. And obviously we've already mentioned me being a Binding of Isaac fiend. I was like, oh, a new Binding of Isaac game. Turns out it's actually a card game, not a video game.
And this is a Kickstarter launch.
Yeah. And it turns out 4 Souls is an obvious play on the Zelda 4 Swords game. So, and Binding of Isaac being that kind of top-down dungeon look as you play through the video game, it's nice that they're sort of referencing Zelda again in their title. So yeah, I only found it this evening just before the podcast, and so I got very excited, and I sent Christian the link, and I was like, oh, I'm really going to enjoy this. On the Kickstarter, there isn't a great deal of information about the mechanics of the game. It's still being refined by McMillan and his wife, who are two of the main playtesters of the game. But it looks really good, and anyone familiar with the game is going to be really excited to see familiar bosses and characters and items and everything sort of appearing on cards, and yeah, it'd be great. And the feeling I get is that it's similar. It's going to be similar in vibe to Munchkin for those that have played that game.
Yep.
Yeah. So the idea is that you each play a separate character, and you're each aiming to be the sole winner of the game, but the journey to become that winner involves alliances and backstabbing and hoarding of items and spending gold and sabotaging each other. So those games are always really fun, I find, when you get into a good group and everyone settles down for the night for a bit of treachery. That's always good.
And as of recording, it's already blown past its goal. It took 1.5 hours to reach its goal. It's currently at 235,000 of its 67,000 gold. So there's no worry about it dropping. It's just a matter of how many stretch goals they add to make it more exciting. And there is a launch day live stream that is happening, or will have happened by the time this podcast comes out. But that's happening in 5 hours' time for us. And they're going to show off the prototype in this live stream. So that'll be interesting to check out.
Yeah, and it's really funny because whenever you look at Kickstarters for games, there's always that like high-end backer reward where it's something really special, and I think this is really cool as well because the backer reward amount even is a bit of an in-joke because it's $777, which is sort of in theme with Isaac, and then the reward is that Macmillan will actually create a custom card for you to include in your set, and it's also signed by him. So, I mean, it's a nice little touch, but I don't know, it's almost $777 US is a lot of money for
that's huge.
A card that I mean, I can draw you a card. You give me $700, I don't mind doing that for you. Yeah. So. Yeah.
I don't know. Some people go crazy on the Kickstarter spending, though. I've sworn off Kickstarters now. I need the instant gratification. Having to wait delivery times for things is just not my jam. So.
Yeah, sure.
I've generally sworn off Kickstarters unless it's something that I think it is going to fail its goal, and then I do want to support it. But for something like this, I'm probably happy just to wait until it comes out and buy it. But yeah, I'd much rather support something that is perhaps going to fail.
Yeah.
Yeah, rather than something that's already blown past its budget no matter how.
Yeah.
Yeah, they got plenty of friends. They'll be fine.
They do. It'll be fine.
Yeah,
but that'll be fun to check out when it comes out.
Yeah, I'm keen. I'll probably back it. I mean, I don't back often on Kickstarter. I've only done it a couple of times, but I have a notoriously bad memory. So what'll happen is I'll back it and then I'll totally forget about it, and then it'll be a nice surprise when I get the email saying it's ready.
Yeah, so, Christmas out of nowhere. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Nice. All right. Well, we didn't have a really big busy news week this week, so that was pretty much the long and short of it. So we'll hopefully have some more stuff happening next week. But for now, over to Christian.
Oh, yeah. So for our main topic, as we introduced at the top of the show, we're going to have a chat about accessibility and gaming for deaf and hard of hearing people. So there was a bit of news recently about the Xbox One controller with a whole bunch of like accessibility options for people with like motor impairment. And that just got me thinking more about accessibility issues in games. And I thought it would be awesome to have Adrian on, who is obviously somebody who's had a lot of involvement with the deaf community, and just to chat about deaf and hard of hearing gaming as like a case community to look at. Obviously, as well, we did want to involve people from that community. So during the week, I reached out to a friend of Adrian and ours, and had a bit of a chat with him, who is a deaf gamer, and had a chat to him about his experience, and he even reached out to some of his deaf gaming friends too, and relayed some of the discussion questions by them. So as we sort of go through the topic tonight, I'm going to sort of chime in with some input from he's fine with us using his name, so his name is Josh. So I'm going to chime in with some of his input, so to make sure that he has a representation in this discussion. And yeah, so I think just to get started, it's probably a good idea just to go over what accessibility looks like for deaf and hard of hearing people, and what the actual the barriers that they can run into are. So I don't know, Adrian, did you want to just maybe talk about what you think some of the main barriers might be for deaf and hard of hearing people, and how it actually manifests?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, obviously, anyone who works in sort of community services or social services, or works with people with disability, have sort of a different understanding of what a barrier is. And one theme that I always sort of find pops up in discussion is when you work in a sector such as disability. In my case, it's to do with deaf and hard of hearing people. It all seems really natural and really intuitive, the kind of barriers that they might face every day. But it's totally understandable that the wider community would never even think to address barriers, because they've never even experienced them or never thought that it could possibly be a barrier. So when it comes to a hearing loss, specifically if we're talking about deaf gamers, so just a little bit of backstory or a little bit of information to preface this. First of all, deafness is actually quite a spectrum. So you've got some people on one end of the spectrum that are profoundly deaf, and that means that they can't hear speech. They can hear very, very little. Some of them might have a little bit of ambient background noise. Often they'll be assisted with something like a hearing aid or a cochlear implant. But those devices need to really be used from a young age to be fully utilised, because the brain needs to adjust to its use and get used to having its input. Yeah. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you might have some people that have a very very light hearing loss, and so with the use of a hearing aid or a cochlea can hear pretty much perfectly well. And really the spectrum, someone can fall anywhere on that spectrum in between those two things. So the first misconception, I guess, is that deaf people are deaf and they can't hear anything, because it's kind of similar with people that are blind. Often blind people do have some sensory perception of light. It's the same with hearing people. A lot of hearing people do have some tiny bit of residual hearing. The major impact of this is actually literacy, which is sort of a major theme through the deaf community and relates to probably access in gaming the most. A lot of people don't realise, a lot of people assume that if you met a deaf person and you didn't know sign language, you could just write a note and that deaf person would be able to read your English and you could have a conversation that way. Unfortunately, the reality is deaf people actually have quite poor literacy levels in general. So I think that I remember the statistic that I learnt was that most Year 12 deaf graduates have the reading and writing ability of a 7-year-old, and that's usually the lucky ones. So
it's essentially a second language to them, isn't it? Really,
it is. So. Yeah. Really, there's a bit here, there's a lot to be said about language development and how you acquire language and things like that. But to make it really salient, to really help people understand, imagine moving to China or Japan or any other country where you don't speak the language. Now imagine being told to learn to read that language without hearing the language.
Yeah.
So that means you need to sit down and learn to read Chinese without pronouncing and without hearing any of it. So what that accounts to is, like, we know that when we see a new word, for instance, pick any word in the English language, the way you learn to write that word is by sounding it out phonetically.
Frog.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So imagine growing up without ever being able to do that, and then being handed something like an essay and being told, "Oh, you can read that. You know English, you can read it." So that is one major misconception when it comes to deaf people and their level of literacy, and that relates directly to gaming. So things like subtitles, for instance, are great for those deaf people who can read them. For deaf people who rely solely on Auslan or other sign languages and don't have great literacy, sometimes subtitles aren't actually the best form of accessibility. So that sort of gives you a little bit of an idea. And I mean that's one aspect of many different points regarding accessibility in gaming for them.
It's funny you say that, because I have encountered a number of games over the years that do offer subtitles, and from what I can see, very, very little else. And to me, I've been sort of vaguely aware of what you've just sort of said at the time. I've kind of thought to myself, okay, well, this is a company that in terms of disability, yes, they get some points for at least considering it, but all they've done is tick a box. They haven't,
So it would just
exactly
on that. So like you said, subtitles. You're saying they're useful for people who can access them, but it's not. There's a whole swath of deaf gamers who will still struggle with that because of their literacy. So what else do you think can really be done there? Like things like just visual like representations on the screen, or like haptic feedback through controllers, anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, fortunately, a lot of games, especially with rumbling controllers, that's a really useful aspect. I mean, a good example is Josh, who we talked about. That friend of ours who's deaf. I've talked a lot with Josh about his experience in gaming, and a lot of his experiences when it comes to mainstream games that don't provide access is he and his friends usually find a way around that issue when they can. So, I mean, examples like a controller rumbling. Imagine if you were playing something like a first-person shooter and the controller had the capacity to rumble on the side of the controller that you were being shot on, or that someone was approaching on. A big one is like the best example is first-person shooters, because it puts you directly in the driver's seat of another person, of a fictional person. So I mean, and Josh is a massive Overwatch fan. He and I have played Overwatch together. I think he's even played with you as well, Christian.
Yeah.
Like, we've played together. And Josh always brings up, and I mean, anyone who's played Overwatch, this is going to click instantly. But McCree's ultimate High Noon. So in Overwatch, the way that ultimate is triggered is you'll hear McCree say, it's high noon? I think
it's high noon.
It's high noon. And that audio cue is your signal to take cover, because McCree is not a very big character, so often he won't be in view, but you'll hear him say it's high noon, and you know that means death.
He does have a red glow around him, but if you're not facing the right direction, that does not help you. Yeah,
and it's pretty faint as well. It's not particularly striking. So imagine if you were playing, I mean, maybe you guys even might want to try it. Next time you play a game that you're really enjoying, turn the sound off, have a go, see how that impacts your experience.
I actually did that recently with Minecraft because I was actually multitasking and listening to something else while I was playing. And one thing I noticed immediately is that when it hits nighttime and you can't hear those zombies walk up on you when you're farming at night, that's a bad thing.
yeah, exactly.
That leads into one of the questions that I had for Josh was whether or not there were any particular like genres or types of games that he found were particularly challenging as a deaf gamer, and he did highlight like online competitive multiplayer and like FPS in general, which you can see how that makes sense, being so like focused on like Twitch gaming and very quick reaction speeds. Any like issue that you've got that is going to impair your ability to respond on the spot is going to be have a big impact. So I can definitely see that in Overwatch.
And I mean the thing is like the solutions to these issues aren't that complicated, and they aren't expensive, and they aren't difficult to implement. The problem mainly is that people are unaware. So for instance, in Overwatch, in that example of a character using their ultimate, all it would take is a subtitle at the bottom of the screen. If it suddenly popped up that McCree was saying it's high noon, a person can visually process that information just as quickly as they hear it if it pops up on the bottom of the screen, and then to take cover. So questions are sometimes raised by people like, oh, isn't that unfair? But it wouldn't be only provided to deaf people. It could be provided to anyone. Anyone should be able to turn on those captions and see those triggers. And I mean, there's other things you could do, like screen like pulsing with different coloured lights, or on-screen indicators that could help. And these kind of solutions, they're things that could be put in the game's development that would make a massive, massive difference to people with a hearing loss who, like you say, need to rely on quick reflexes. And to be honest, let's face it, they are at a disadvantage, because they can't compete on the same level. Imagine if like a very narrative-based game like Life is Strange, for example, if it actually had like picture-in-picture interpreting, how cool that would be. I was just about to bring that up. So, I mean, you mentioned what would be the best form of access, and it's mirrored in gaming. It's mirrored in real life, where the best form of access is always whatever the source language is of the person consuming that content. So, if you spoke another language, of course, the best form of access would be to have that content delivered to you in your native language. So for deaf people, often that is Auslan, it's sign language. So that is their native language. It's what they grew up with. It's what they're most fluent in. So sometimes people think access means providing subtitles, but as we've already discussed, English is often a second language for most deaf people. So in a perfect world, playing a game like God of War, imagine if you were playing through God of War, and any time there was dialogue, a little picture-in-picture faded in, and Kratos was signing to you what he's saying. Yeah, like that would be amazing. Awesome. I mean, that would be fantastic. Imagine if it was Kratos doing sign language. That'd be amazing.
Sweet.
Actually, motion capture it.
Yeah, why not? And like, especially now with motion capture, because it's gotten so well refined, in a very quick amount of time. There's no reason why you couldn't chuck some sensors on a native sign language user, mocap them in the studio and add that to the game. Of course, that would be more expensive and cost more resources and more time, etc. But the impact, I mean, the funny thing is that it hasn't happened yet. So we haven't seen it happen yet. And I know there is a game that we're going to talk about where it's on the borderline of happening. But imagine if one big AAA studio provided that access, and then imagine the cascade effect that would have on, and because people would be supportive of it even if they didn't have a hearing loss. There'd be plenty of people that would, because people love a feel-good story, But like you say, that Eminem interpreter, or the one that is always making the rounds, is any time a Disney character at Disneyland does a little bit of sign language to a child, those stories, garner huge amounts of attention online. So you can imagine Santa. The kind of Deaf Santa. That's a perfect example. I have been Deaf Santa. That was a bit of an in-joke from Christian. that kind of stuff has any kind of emotional connection will garner support from the whole community, not just those that are needing that access. Yeah.
What you're just saying about subtitles not being good enough as well, it just gave me that perspective of thinking as a hearing person, step one in playing a game in another language would be to have subtitles, something like a game like Yakuza, which has subtitles. But then when a game is properly localized into my language, it is dubbed over, it is given a voice. So when I play a game like even something like The Witcher, which is made by a Polish developer, I don't have to sit there and listen to them speaking in Polish with English subtitles because the localization's been properly done and it's been dubbed into English.
There's a degree of authenticity as well, like when it comes to other languages. Like we heard about that with Ghost of Tsushima at E3. They're going to actually have the Japanese language version of that available, which I think is fantastic. So
that's really cool for like people who value that authenticity. But if you think of it as like an accessibility issue too, it's not something that's kind of for flavor. It's very vital to these people. So
Wouldn't it be hilarious if we had a game like the Quiet Man that was shown at E3, where like the titular character is actually deaf, and maybe during the game he communicates only using sign language, and then all of a sudden we've got an accessibility issue for the entire other group of people who can't really interpret the sign language. Yeah. Hey, Adrian, I just had a quick question about the signing stuff on screen. Like, following on with the idea of actually having models on screen or mocapped sort of actors doing the signing. Now, obviously you're well versed in Auslan, which is the Australian sort of version of sign language. How does that go in terms of international standards? Like, is there a US standard that is significantly different to Auslan that would actually matter when it comes to doing that kind of stuff during game development? How would that actually sit?
Yeah, great. It's a great question because it is one of the first things you kind of learn once you start learning sign language, is that people assume that sign languages all around the world are the same. So there is one signed language and everyone around the world uses that one language. It's probably the biggest misconception. Sign languages are different in every country. So Australian sign language is different to New Zealand sign language, is different to English, to American, to Japanese, to Indonesian. Every country has its own sign language, and even different areas of the same country. So for instance, those in Victoria and Queensland have a slightly different version of the one that we use in WA. So it's not hugely different, but there are the occasional words, I shouldn't say words, the occasional signs that are completely different to what they are over here.
Like spoken language too, you can imagine. Exactly. A dialect, and maybe two cultures are quite close, so they share a lot, like between like American English and Australian English, but then there's more divergent areas.
Totally.
And
that relates specifically to another really important point, and it's that sign languages are not artificial; they are naturally occurring languages. So they are formed naturally and have their own grammar and syntax. They're not a reproduction of English. They're not a reproduction of Japanese or Chinese. They are their own language with their own lexicon and et cetera, et cetera. So when it comes to looking back to your question, Luke, if you were going to provide signing access for a video game, say a AAA game wants to put a picture-in-picture interpreter on the screen, not interpreter, sorry, a character signing. First of all, that would be groundbreaking. That would be amazing. But you're right in that sign language wouldn't be applicable worldwide. It would need to be specific to each region.
So it's like when you have a subtitle option, you probably want to be able to toggle different languages with those subtitles.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and of course that is a limitation when it comes to production costs and time and that sort of thing. So it might be. Well, it is fairly unreasonable to expect them to have a different sign language for every country in the world, because there are just
spoken languages too. It's only usually 3 or 4 at the most spoken languages they want to get localized into.
There has got to be a company out there that has the appetite to be the first and break that ground and get the headline.
I reckon.
Yeah.
I reckon Naughty Dog. Hey, I don't know why. Just in my mind, Naughty Dog. I can see Last of Us 2 or something like that.
Yeah. And what you've just said really connects with what Josh brought up to us recently as well. And that's unfortunately the kind of lack of acknowledgement of advocacy that deaf gamers do engage in, because first of all, you're dealing with a marginalised community, so deaf people are marginalised, and then within that community you've then got gamers who are a few years behind, I would say, mainstream gamers, in that there are not a huge amount of deaf deaf gamers, I would surmise. That's not a statement I can back up empirically, but from what Josh has told me, that is the case. So then you've got, very few people who require this sort of specific access, and they do lobby online, usually through social media platforms, because that's the only avenue they have. And unfortunately, in a string of Facebook posts, their posts can be lost or overlooked. And one of the current sort of interesting case studies is Blizzard. Josh himself has sort of advocated on Blizzard's Facebook page, and one of the blaring omissions is the lack of subtitles for Overwatch's cinematic movies.
Oh yeah.
There's all of Blizzard's cinematic movies, none of them have subtitles. It's actually quite a glaring oversight. It's quite shocking when you start to think about it. So never mind the game itself, but all those, beautiful cinematic movies that they put out supporting their game, none of them are subtitled. So I've had to actually explain to Josh what's happening in those videos, and he's like, I worked out some of it, but I missed out on that detail, and I didn't know what that meant. And it's the same in-game with Overwatch, where I remember one day I sat down with Josh, and I explained to him all the different catchphrases that the characters yell when they use their ultimate. Things like, Junkrat ripping the chain and yelling fire in the hole.
Yeah, I got you in my sights.
Yeah, and he was like, oh my God, I had no idea that they said those things. Because there's absolutely no indication in the game that occurs. So, and it's funny because Blizzard, there was recently a video floating around of a deaf teenager in the States who was attending the live competitive
Overwatch League.
Pro-scene. Yeah, the Overwatch League. So he was actually attending the Overwatch League matches with an interpreter. So he was sitting in the audience, and the interpreter up the front was interpreting the matches for him, which is amazing. That is a fantastic bit of progress. But it's kind of a band-aid solution. It doesn't really... in an ideal world, he wouldn't need to use an interpreter to access that event. Ideally, Blizzard would be providing appropriate access, which I guess is what this topic is about.
Yeah.
There's sort of the it's persistent through all fields of disability and all fields of social work. Is the sort of out of sight, out of mind attitude where we'll just slap some subtitles on that game. Now it's accessible, or we'll add a colorblind option to that game. Now it's accessible.
Yeah.
And from one perspective, it makes sense because there's not a lot of time for people to worry about that. But on the other hand, when you're a AAA studio raking in millions of dollars, surely you could invest in doing the right thing, And to be honest, an interpreter is not always the most accessible form of access either. In that situation where that teenage guy is watching that Overwatch match, I can, as a sign language interpreter, I can say categorically, 100%, there is no way that interpreter would be conveying everything that is happening in that professional match. There's just no way to physically do it in that amount of time.
Too much stuff going on. Yeah.
Exactly.
One of the questions that I asked Josh as well was whether he had any examples of game developers listening to feedback and actually providing any access or accessibility options based on feedback, and he couldn't name any. No feel-good stories here so far, which is quite fortunate. Yeah. But you did mention The Quiet Man, which was, I think Luke mentioned that. There's a recent trailer at E3 that seems to have a protagonist who is deaf and does use sign language in the game.
Well, and I asked Josh... sorry, just to cut in for a second. One of the things that really stood out to me about that wasn't just the fact that it was catering for maybe that type of communication, but it was just that you just don't see the representation of those kinds of characters to begin with.
Yeah.
I mean, when's the last time you played a game with a deaf character in it? I just couldn't remember one.
So I did. On the Quiet Man topic, I asked Josh, what he thought about the game and what representation of characters means to him personally. Obviously, he's not speaking on behalf of the entire deaf community, but personally, I got the impression from him that the representation wasn't as big of an issue as the access, and that. When it came to representation, the one thing that he pointed out was authenticity of the deaf characters. So the trailer for The Quiet Man, Josh could spot that it wasn't a deaf person doing the motion capture for the character, that he seemed to be a hearing actor playing a deaf character, which, when it comes to representation is pretty poor. And he could spot straight away that it was a poor representation. So I thought that was pretty disappointing to learn that at least according to Josh, it does seem to be a hearing actor playing that character.
Yeah, that's sort of it's not the most applicable term, but that kind of whitewashing term where people use, people from other minorities or marginalised people to represent what the mainstream media thinks people want. And I know that in using that as an example, deaf people unfortunately have had to put up with that crap for a long time. Yeah. And it happens a lot, especially in movies, where they'll have a person who is, in inverted commas, deaf, but they're actually being played by someone who can hear. And it's if you know any level of sign language, it's immediately clear that they're not a native user. And while that's fine, and while a hearing audience will fawn over that actor and say, "Oh, it was so amazing seeing the sign language," deaf people are like, "Come on. What is that?" Yeah. That's and there are real issues of cultural appropriation that happen with the deaf community, much like cultural appropriation in the US. Because the deaf community is a marginalised community, their language truly belongs to them. So there are ethical issues in regards to using sign language and using deaf characters in mainstream gaming if proper representation isn't there. And I have a feeling The Quiet Man, may be a perfect example of that, where it may not be a deaf actor portraying that. The other point that's also really important is that deaf people, just because they're deaf doesn't mean they want to see deaf characters. Like, it doesn't mean like, I'm deaf, I want to see deaf characters. That's almost a little bit condescending in a way. It's like, "Oh, look here, we've put a deaf person in our video game. Don't you love it?" It's like, well, no, I just want to play the video game.
It's like diversity casting for the sake of diversity casting.
Yeah, and they want to play good video games. So, like Josh said, that he wasn't particularly interested in playing The Quiet Man because it just doesn't look like a good game to him. So it doesn't matter. Give them access to the games that we all want to play. Don't just create sort of games off to the side with deaf characters. They go, "Here you go, now you're happy."
And I mean, in saying that, this sort of criticism is valid, but it's also, to be fair, it still should be applauded. I mean, the idea that this character's in the game, because at the moment we have nothing. So something at this stage is still better than nothing. And that kind of it's like I said about, Luke, your experience seeing an interpreter at the Perth Games Expo. Other people will now see this deaf character in this video game, and instantly, they'll start thinking, "Oh, that's right, sign language, that's a thing. Hang on, why don't all games have sign language in them?"
Yeah.
Oh, hang on, what about deaf people playing video games?
Visibility is half the battle. You just got to make this thing... this is a consideration that should not be hidden. It should have a spotlight shone on it regularly and often. And even if there's some missteps in actually, catering for it the correct way, actually trying is a shitload better than ignoring it completely.
That's right, yeah. And I mean, this is where I start to get, where it kind of blends over into my work a little bit, where in my role as an interpreter, I do engage in quite a bit of advocacy as well. And I mean, the thing is, it is hard, to be socially aware and self-aware about access. It's very hard to do, because once you open that door, it's hard to go back. Once you've seen lack of access, you can't not see it everywhere. And so, for instance, in my role, I'm planning a wedding at the moment, as an example, and I have to think about, if I invite deaf people to my wedding, I'm going to need interpreters at the wedding. I'm going to need to, give those interpreters breaks. We're going to have to factor it into the schedule. It really changes everything. And in the same way, where once you have a little bit more knowledge about the deaf community and what their needs are, you start to realise how like the lack of access that really is out there. And there's a common misconception in all kind of disability that, it's 2018, we've got this, we've solved the disability issue, we've solved access.
Nope.
Oh, people have access now, they've got access, it's 2018. But when you actually start to peel away, the veneer of, lip service, you start to realise there is very little access out there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of companies struggle to make, bare basic good games, let alone ones that cater to all sorts of audiences.
So that's true. Yeah, no, that's a fair point. Yeah.
Before we wrap up tonight, there's another thing I wanted to talk about, which is like software or add-ons for games that deaf gamers have been able to use to help give them access. And I want to pose a question to you, Luke, which is, imagine a piece of software that you can add into a competitive multiplayer game that will give you additional information about that game. What do you think might be one complication when it comes to allowing that?
Yeah, well, I mean, if we're talking competitive, availability of that for everybody is always something that gets raised. And we've seen that kind of thing before when it comes to Hearthstone and deck tracking software, because, at competitive events, there's a lot of controversy about whether that should be allowed or not because of the level of information it gives you above other people if there's a small portion of the players that don't have access to that kind of thing. So it's tricky when it comes to deaf people or anyone with a disability that has something that caters for that particular need, because it will in a way kind of give them something that the mainstream populace won't, in sacrifice to the thing that they can't actually bring themselves to the table. So,
and it's clearly not a tables turn situation. But what you're raising there is the idea that it could be misconstrued as cheating.
Yeah.
And especially if you're talking about like automatic cheat detection that a lot of games have, it's definitely something that can run afoul of that. So Josh pointed out one program in particular, which is called Sonar Radar, and I looked into this a little bit. It's used for PUBG, and it adds essentially like a mini map into the bottom center of the screen, and it gives you like almost like a radial waveform map of any noise that's being made. So it'll actually show you the direction that the sound is coming from. And every resource that I found for Sonar Radar was talking about it as a cheat.
Oh.
So there were multiple YouTube videos that I found and articles where they were talking about it, people complaining about it, people talking about it as like as a cheat. But that's total crap if people are using it for accessibility. But it is just an interesting aspect of that I hadn't really considered is people misusing these tools for nefarious purposes.
Yeah. I mean, it's tricky to get everybody on the same playing field. I mean, it's a complication when it comes to any sort of level of competition where there's disabilities involved. I mean, you look at the Olympics and how different groups of athletes have to be categorized depending on how consistent their disabilities are with each other.
Yeah,
there's a lot of different shades of grey there, and some people have got it a lot worse than others. And how do you say whether they are or are not disabled at the point where they can compete on the same level? That's a big, tricky one. I don't think there's a clear answer to that at all. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, like any aspect of life involving disability and social access, it's one thing I've learnt from being an interpreter is there is no black and white. It's all a big, messy grey area in every aspect. So, but in saying that, there are black and white decisions that need to be made. Black and white responsibilities that need to be undertaken by those in positions of power and those that are responsible to those who have issues of access. So, I hope that has given you guys a bit of broader information on the topic, and I hope our listeners out there will really sort of think about it next time they play a video game. And I really strongly encourage you next time you're playing a video game to turn the sound off and give it a go and see how it impacts your experience, and then think about all the people out there that have to deal with that on a daily basis, not only when it comes to gaming, but perhaps other aspects of their lives as well.
Yeah, definitely going to do that. And so, I'm really interested to hear from any listeners if they've got any follow-up questions that they'd like me to relay through to Josh and or Adrian about this topic, because it's always good for people to reach out and want to learn more about this. So, Luke, if people did want to reach out, where could they find us?
Put me on the spot. I don't know. Maybe send it to mail@partyloader.com. You can hit us up on Facebook as well. I think putting this sort of stuff on our Facebook page is a good way to get everybody to have some visibility of some of the dialogue too. So hit us up there. Just search for Party Loaded on Facebook. We are on Twitter, of course, at Party Loaded Show. And the other places you can find us just in general while we're on the topic, YouTube at youtube.com/channelendgame and on Twitch at twitch.tv/partyloaded. So I don't know. It's actually got me thinking now, if we ever plan like our future streams and stuff, we might actually have to try and experiment with getting some signing happening on stream as well.
That'd be awesome. Yeah, I'll do it for you. No problem.
Do a bit of an experiment with that. That'd be a cool thing to try.
Yeah, sure. And like I say, it's a fertile area for growth. This kind of thing is people would assume that it's well developed, but it's not. So anyone out there, if there's any small game studios out there that are thinking of ways that they want to really be inclusive, get in touch with Party Loaded, and I'm sure sure we could work something out and help you guys, really improve your access as well.
We'll definitely do some follow-up if we hear about any of that. We'll mention it on the show as well.
Yep. The challenge has been thrown. The gauntlet is down. Let's make it happen. Sounds good. All right. Well, Adrian, thank you so much for coming by tonight and letting us tap your brain for all of this awesome info. So I've gotten heaps out of tonight, and I'm sure that a lot of other people listening have as well. So
I'm glad.
We need to do this again at some point, I think, because I think we could easily run this topic for another hour or two.
Sure. Yeah. No problem.
We wanted to. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, happy to be involved.
All right, well, I won't sort of spend any more time talking about gaming for the next week or so. We'll just catch up in 7 days' time and pick up where we left off. But hopefully Jam will be back then. Next episode, we are, of course, covering our party game of the month, which is SteamWorld Dig 2, which I know that Christian and I have already sunk a fair bit of time into. Spoiler alert, it might be a pretty good review.
Spoiler alert for sure, yeah.
I'll just interject and say that I have played that game too, and it is great.
Yep.
It is great.
So there you go. All right, well, you can send us some bullets, Adrian. We'll make sure we include your commentary next week. Yeah. But anyway, we've run late. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Hope you have a great week. We'll catch you again in 7 days' time, where we'll talk about more fun and frivolity in the world of video gaming. But for tonight, thanks for listening, and good night.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
The Party Loaded podcast is a Channel Endgame production. For this and more great gaming content, bookmark channelendgame.com.